Good evening. Welcome to Talk Gnosis. Tonight's guest is Scott Jones, author of When the Stars Are Right, an authentic, When the Stars Are Right, Towards an Authentic Rylaian Spirituality. Welcome, Scott. How are you this evening?
Not too bad, Kenneth. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. Bishop Peterson, glad to see you as well.
Wonderful to see you as well, and wonderful to see Scott on the show.
Well, let's jump right into this because when Bishop Peterson had told me about reading your book, this is something I was not ever familiar with. So can you tell us exactly what is Rylaian spirituality?
Well, it is essentially what I was going for with the book was an attempt to basically see whether the mythos that weird fiction writer Howard Phillips Lovecraft created back in the early part of the 20th century, whether it had any sort of valid spiritual expression. He was a writer who was very nihilistic in his viewpoints and in his fiction, and he was also a lot of his work has been taken as very campy, particularly within the last, within the first 2 decades of the 21st century. He's basically become a sort of a pop cultural touchstone for the weird and the tentacly. Even though those didn't actually, tentacles are not actually that big of a deal with Lovecraft. It's much more sort of a cosmic nihilism, the insignificance of man and the vastness of the cosmos. Pretty grim stuff when you get down on it. And I think that's why Lovecraft has had, sort of a recent renaissance. He's sort of coming into his own. In his fiction, there are a lot of weird cults that worship, alien god things from beyond time and space. These are often seen as, folks who have gone completely insane and, clearly are not thinking clearly. And I thought, well, is there a way to think clearly about these fictional deities, about these, conceptual critters? And can there be any, legitimate spiritual benefit derived from his, highly unspiritual and kind of creepy work, So Rylaian spirituality, it was sort of my go-to term for how this would eventually look. It's sort of a cheerful nihilism almost.
Yes.
It's a cheerful nihilism. It's a recognition of our insignificance, but it's being all right with that. There's a certain freedom to it. In Lovecraft's fiction, again, a lot of his protagonists did not do well with the revelations, that they would find through their researches. It was, usually an assault on the ego, an assault on your own feelings of importance. I saw that as a good thing. That can be beneficial. That can free you up to do good work in the world, or at least have more fun.
Yeah, as I think I mentioned to you before we started the show, I got your book, and I had never read Lovecraft before, and I knew a little bit about the mythos, but I had never read Lovecraft. And
you're probably better off.
Well, the funny thing is that I was reading your book on the way to Las Vegas, and while I was in Las Vegas, so on a trip to Las Vegas, which, as we were talking about, is just in one of these incredibly dense places. It's spiritually one of the densest places I've ever been in my life. Very peculiar. And yet your book excited me. And I got more excited about your book than I have about a book on theology or spirituality in a very, very long time. And I was really very surprised at my own reaction. But what
That's
I
wonderful
saw,
to hear.
yeah, no, I was like, I've read so much stuff, and there's good stuff written by individuals from their own personal experience, but you had taken something and had taken a completely, what seemed to me, an original approach, and which actually is kind of a tedious word to use in this situation, but I hope you understand what I mean. That you actually went into it. You actually plumbed that depth. There was a real sense of gnosis in your work, even though it was it's very different from the kind of gnosis that we often think about. We often think about, and we even use the terms in modern Gnosticism about being illuminated with gnosis or the light of gnosis. But you speak of the black gnosis, which is different. Can you?
It is.
Yes.
The black gnosis for me is it's basically coming out on the other side of that process of realizing sort of our Lovecraftian place in the universe. Lovecraft has a wonderful bit of phrasing in one of his stories where it's basically we find ourselves on a placid island of ignorance amidst black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. He throws that in as a writer on the back end because, of course, he was a horror writer. He was trying to scare people. The black gnosis is basically what occurs when one has cast off into those black seas. It's somewhat akin to the I may be mixing my terms here, but it's somewhat akin to the dark night of the soul, right? It's what happens when you come through on the other side. It's knowing that which cannot be known. It is the the enlightenment that comes when you try to intellectualize that which cannot be locked down. Many of the Lovecraftian deities, and I treat them as archetypes. Many of the Lovecraftian deities are formless and chaotic, and there's no way you can pin them down. So entering into a provisional relationship with them gets you to that point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for me. I mean, I have an understanding of the dark night of the soul, which is certainly when you're in that, it's a real painful place for a lot of people to be. But from a say, for example, a Christian perspective, the idea is that once you emerge, there is this light, this orderly God outside that waiting for you. But in fact, in the universe that you're proposing, you've got these chaotic beings.
Right.
Which are by no means orderly. They're not waiting to embrace you, or if they are, the embrace may not be what you're expecting it to be. But
that's practically guaranteed.
Yeah. But what fascinated me about this is for me, I had a very strong sense of my own presence when I was reading your work. Because, okay, if I'm surrounded by madness and chaos and the gods are not particularly interested in my best interest, in fact, as far as they're concerned, I'm uninteresting, which is fine. But, so what do I do right now? And there was a sense of really being in my place.
Yeah.
Being right here. And so it comes to things like, for example, if the elder gods if they're not interested in me any more than I'm interested in an insect, what happens when I take an interest in an insect in my home? That's an experiment. That's an experience when instead of swatting a fly, I help it get out.
Yeah.
And it was just
So you felt you had more agency?
Yeah.
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 Good.
In a very real sense. See, that was something that I got from your work. So I don't know if that was what you intended, but
it absolutely was. Again, bringing it back to the sort of rank and file Lovecraftian fan. We tend towards, and I count myself, amongst the group. We tend to model ourselves after Lovecraftian protagonists who are somewhat ineffectual. Once they've learned what they've learned, it's pretty much game over for them. They shut down, they go mad. Surely death would be better. All those various tropes. With the Black Gnosis and with relay and consciousness, that the agency you have as as an ordered thing that partakes of the disorder, of the greater disorder of the chaos. You're just. I've had it compared to the philosophies of Thomas Ligotti, who I don't know if you're familiar with that author, but he's very nihilistic. Basically, what I came down to was the positive response to this, to this enlightenment, to this information, is equally as valid as sort of the nihilistic shutting oneself off and building character armor and what have you. The positive, extroverted, well, okay. Perhaps we are insignificant. Well, let's go then. Let's gather more knowledge. Let's correlate our contents. Let's may as well go for broke.
Well, right? I think I'm sorry. It's been a while since I've read the book, but you talk about, and one response to the Black Gnosis is the grin.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
There are three. There are three physical marks. I decided they would be, and that's the first one is obvious. Oh wait, is the first one the chill? Yes, the first one is the chill, which is of course the natural human reaction to learning horrible things. You get that sort of that shiver of horror. But on the flip side of that, there's also there's the old primate teeth bared at the information. We may as well always look on the bright side of life. You may as well bite into it. You're not going to do that without grinning, at least a little bit. So, yeah.
I remember a time, and I apologize for drawing so much back on my own life, but it's probably why your book touched me so much. But it reminded me of a time I was in the middle of a terrible storm, and I was trying to get into my college dorm, and my dorm was over here. There were buildings all around, so there was kind of this weird wind tunnel. And I had an umbrella, but the umbrella had been blown out. So I could not move because the umbrella, I couldn't pull it back, I couldn't pull it forward, and I was being battered on all sides. And it was absolute mayhem. And I couldn't let go of the umbrella because it could fly off and hurt somebody.
Right.
So I was absolutely trapped by these chaotic forces of nature. And my reaction was to start laughing. Because I guess I had a choice. I could get really, really upset, or I could just start laughing, and that was my response to that. And so that was something that I harkened back to when I read your book, because, all right, well, if we are these insignificant, lesser than insects in a chaotic universe, we can go mad.
Yeah.
Or we could even control going mad. And you talk a little bit about that and about that ritual that you did.
Mm-hmm.
There's that kind of controlled madness, but you can also grin, bare your teeth, and decide to work with what you have. Yeah,
into the storm, into the storm of being. So much of what I see is, as the real failings of a nihilistic viewpoint is that it's essentially sort of a teen anger almost, oh, I'm not significant, right? I'm really upset about that. It's basically, the identity has risen up and, wants to claim more than it really has access to. Yeah. So the grin is all about saying, well, I am quite possibly, a construct of my, my time, my upbringing, my place on the planet, the fact that I was, born human, all these things. But these are constructs. And once you've once you've begin to incorporate that into your view of yourself, well, yourself necessarily spreads out a little bit more, and that's that makes us more compassionate.
It does,
because you're identifying more with others.
Just a quick question, if I can just interject here for a second. We can continue this in our Talk Gnosis After Dark, but listening to some of this dialogue going back and forth between yourself and Bishop Peterson, it's kind of striking me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing some similarities possibly between some of maybe the writings of Kenneth Grant or even of Austin Osman Spare. Are there similarities with this particular tradition and those particular currents?
There's a few. Absolutely. I have certainly enjoyed Grant in the past. And I love Spare's, Alphabet of Desire, and the whole, his talk about an individual, an individual take, highly specific to him, but it works. It works. Yeah, I love those guys. And so, of course, although did I explicitly draw from them? No, but I can see, after years of exposure, I'm not surprised that that a little bit bled into the book for sure. Yeah.
Very cool. And I know that Monsignor Jordan Stratford, who's been a guest on our show a few times, he wrote the introduction to your book. And
he makes me sound a lot smarter than I am.
Oh, he's pretty good at that. But yeah, he did mention, and he did some comparison with you and Grant and Pete Carroll and Michael Berdio. So yeah, there's some definitely kind of a tradition here. It's just that you took it in I think he is correct. Taken it in a different direction. We do have to get this show wrapped up, but we're going to be joined by Mr. Jones on Talk Gnosis After Dark, our podcast. Those of you who are our Patreon supporters can sit in on that show and actually watch us and hear us tape it live. That can get to be very amusing, particularly when Bishop Canterbury's pets or my cats decide to make an appearance, and sometimes we get very silly. So we do hope you will join us for that. If you are not a Patreon supporter, you'll be able to hear the show when it's put online, probably within a few days. And for those of you who are watching the show, please do, in the comments section, what do you think about this presentation? This is a different understanding of Gnosis than we've often presented on this show. And what do you think about this? And are you a Lovecraft reader? And does this idea of this kind of spirituality, does it appeal to you? We'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Also, I mentioned Patreon supporters before. If you do enjoy our shows and find it helpful, please do support us by pledging a small amount per video or podcast through Patreon. You can visit us at Patreon. patreon.com/Gnostic. You pledge a small amount per video or podcast. It can be just as little as a few cents, and you can cap the amount that you wish to spend each month, so that you're not going to get a surprise at the end of the month. And every penny that you pledge directly supports the development of this and other Gnostic programming. So, Bishop Canterbury, do you want to take us out?
Yes. Again, thanks everyone, for your support, and please join us. Probably this weekend, I'm going to assume Father Tony will have it up there for the continuation of this discussion with Scott Jones. Again, thank you so much, Scott, for joining us, and looking forward to continuing this discussion and Talk Gnosis After Dark. See you all next week. Good night,
Thanks
everyone.
for having me.
Good night.